Should I say it?
Sure.
No, you say it. I don't know.
What? No, you say it.
What am I saying?
Okay, so I'll say it.
I mean, how are you going to edit that in? All of a sudden, just randomly, you're going to be like, by the way, folks.
No, it can be an intro. It can be an intro. Well, welcome to You Do You. This episode, we have Shane Tutmark from Dolour, and he just released the album The Royal We.
Thanks for having me, Birdie.
Of course. I started out as a Dolour fan, and then, you've had lots of different bands between then and now this is the first Dolour album release in 15 years or something?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the last record came out in 2007, but it was already kind of old at that point. So I think of it as 15 years because that was kind of like when I finished really doing any work on Dolour. But that last Dolour record ended up coming out after the first Traveling Mercies album. So in a lot of ways, I never really was able to talk about the end of Dolour or even that last record because I'd kind of already moved on. I basically kind of ghosted Dolour. And so by the time I sort of made the announcement that Dolour was done, it had already been done for quite a while. And that last record ended up getting picked up by this Japanese label that put it out, which was cool. But it was essentially a sort of like, the last real record that came out while it was an active project was New Old Friends. So yeah, in a lot of ways, so much of that stuff felt very kind of unresolved or, I had never really had maybe the closure or whatever that maybe in hindsight, I feel like Dolour maybe had deserved. And that last record was such a it was really me just trying to kind of push the boundaries of like extremes of the Dolour sound. And so, it didn't really feel like a proper swan song kind of thing. It was like a very experimental record. And so I'm really glad, just to be able to have, whether this is like the new final chapter for Dolour or a brand new era to begin, I'm not really even sure yet, but I'm just glad that, a lot of these songs have, a long history. I mean, all these songs date back to that period. I kind of did a lot of work to get them to where they are now, but I'm just, I just think for people that liked Dolour back then, I feel like this is the record where everything kind of comes back together after things getting pretty torn apart on the Years in the Wilderness. So,
yeah, I mean, I didn't think Dolour was really ever going to come back. I thought, you were evolving and you had the Traveling Mercies and Solar Twin and, your own stuff. And so,
yeah,
I was pleasantly surprised.
I mean, if you would have asked me even just 2 years ago, I would have said no way. I mean, it never even crossed my mind. I definitely was always a believer in that kind of don't look back mentality of just keep plowing forward. But I think I got to a point where working on the Solar Twin record was very similar to kind of how I had worked on Suburbiac and New Old Friends. And it sort of just opened that up a crack, and I was able to, I sort of got curious, man, there were so many hundreds of songs that I had sort of left behind when I just abandoned that burning house that was Dolour. And so I started kind of wondering, I wonder what that stuff sounds like now. Cause I really just hadn't even given it a thought, for about a decade. And so when I first kind of uncovered all these old recordings and demos and sketches and whatever, I was like, oh man, I was really just kind of blown away by how much life they still had in them and how so many of them still felt kind of relevant to me. And they didn't feel like, I don't know. They didn't feel tarnished by age at all. They felt exciting kind of. So I kind of went through a few different avenues of trying to figure out what to do. I briefly put out an archive series through Bandcamp where I was just sort of releasing the raw demos. But then I was kind of unsatisfied with, I'd hate that to be the version that's out there of that song. Cause there was both things that I remembered wanting to do with those songs that I hadn't done yet. And then there's, plenty of new things I could kind of do with the songs. And then I went down the route of trying to find old hard drives that might have had sessions that I could like sort of make a new mix of songs that were close to being finished. But that was unfruitful. I mean, like old hard drives that, old laptops that had died with like tons of songs on them, like there's a lot of that stuff. So it ended up just getting to the point where I was like, you know what, the way to do it is, if not now, when? Let's do this thing. I'm not 40 yet. Like, let's, so the approach that I took that I think kind of made it work for me, without feeling like it was just like a nostalgia trip, was like, I had recently worked on a record for Sean Nelson from Harvey Danger. The record's still not out yet, but it should be out, I think, this year, hopefully. He's on a different kind of timeline. With me, I'm just like, as soon as it's done, I want it out. But he kind of, takes his time. But it was a record of like songs that were like a decade old of his, that I was producing, and they were new to me, and they'll be new to most people that hears the record. But it kind of made me realize, wow, you really can sort of. I had never, done that. Every record I've made like has some songs that date back a few years. I mean, I write a lot, and so there are songs that kind of get left behind and then kind of brought back into the fold. But this is the first time I've really reached back into a whole different kind of era project for me. So working on that Sean record kind of made me realize like maybe I could kind of look at it as if like 24-year-old Shane came to me to produce a record, and it felt like I was like collaborating with my younger self on an album. And so it gave me a chance to be objective in a way that I never could have been back then. I was able to just kind of look at the songs as if they came to me from somebody else, and I could see what, I'd want to do to them and where they could go. And, so that was the illusion I carried with me through the record process. But.
That's awesome. I'm curious about the songs because, it's basically sort of 24-year-old Shane songs, but so are you sampling your own music on the album?
No, it's all from scratch. 100% like new. That's a good question though, because it has been kind of confusing to talk about, because it's like, there's like old demos that I was kind of referencing, but yeah, it's all started from scratch. So it took a while for me to warm up my voice to get that high again, because I haven't used that upper region of my voice since then, and I wasn't even sure if I could get there, but kind of after a few months of working on stuff, it sort of started coming back. But yeah. And then also, most of the songs weren't done lyrically back then. So I think there's only maybe 2 songs on the record that have the exact lyrics that they had from back in the day. Most of them had quite a few little like holes in them to patch and, improved rhymes and whatever. But, yeah.
To your credit, I couldn't tell. I was like, is this
good
from 24-year-old Shane, or is this, today?
I ultimately I wanted to be able to stand on its own, like whether or not somebody's a Dolour fan or a fan of any of my projects. Like, I hope it just stands up as, a record, and you don't have to know the backstory to everything. But yeah, like, it was just interesting too. Like, I mean, I feel like I learned a lot about myself in a way, because I've just never had a record like that. It wasn't always easy. A lot of times I questioned, what I was doing or why I was doing it, or, and I had friends going too, like, you're making a new Dolour record. Like why wouldn't you just call it a Shane Tutmark record? Or why wouldn't it be a new Solar, and for whatever reason, to me, Dolour is its own little world, and I feel like if you hear the record, you understand that. But I don't think this record could have come out as a Shane Tutmark record or a Solar Twin record. I think Dolour, and that was a kind of a cool thing to learn looking back for the first time, kind of like, wow, that really was its own little universe that had its own sort of set of sort of rules and principles and whatever that I feel like each of my projects have kind of, developed their own little universes or whatever. So
it's almost like their own aesthetics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's cool.
And I feel like, again, like I said, like being more objective, like I think back when I was making the Dolour records, I was really trying to fit everything I was interested in into each song or each record. And now that I have these different avenues, different, like whether it's a Solar Twin thing or a Shane Tomer thing, now I feel like all the roads are open. There's no closed doors. And I feel like I can really attack each project kind of in a, in a more pure way, instead of trying to cram whatever my interest in like roots music into a Dolour thing or my more electronic or modern thing, like into a Dolour record or whatever, just like, I feel like I have enough avenues now to start to cover all the things I'm interested in.
Nice. I mean, the title of the show, You Do You, Shane.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think for a long time, whether it was consciously or unconsciously, I just kind of had that door to Dolour closed. And now I'm enjoying the fact that, there's no closed doors anymore.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I listened to the whole record on Spotify this morning. I mean, I had heard samples before, but I was curious why do you call it the Royal We? Where did that come from?
Well, the actual name, the Royal We, was the title of an album I was working on when basically like the big trigger that sort of like my grandpa passed away in December of 2006, and I was like maybe like halfway through kind of demoing, starting to record like a proper album. But a number of things happened kind of all at once. I had a laptop that died that had like a ton of sessions on them. Mm-hmm. And I always try to kind of look at things as signs. And I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be working on that. And then my grandpa passed away, and that just immediately kind of made me, my grandpa was a Hawaiian steel guitar player and like a gospel musician. And his dad, my great grandpa, was a country artist. And his second wife, Bonnie Guitar, was like a rockabilly country artist and stuff. And so it just, all of a sudden I just felt like really this heavy weight of like wanting to kind of like honor my family's history or just explore that more. And I had started kind of exploring that a little bit, like without realizing it, like the Years in the Wilderness record, like the second half of it has a little bit of country and rockabilly little things here and there. But again, that record hadn't come out yet. So nobody knew that until I started the Traveling Mercies and just kind of went full steam ahead. And a lot of what made Dolour end too was just, I was getting so backed up with songs, and records were taking so long to make. And every label I'd been on, like, ended up like falling apart, and so I was just, it almost got to the point where I just had so many songs sitting around that weren't, that I couldn't do anything with, that it just collapsed on itself. And so the great thing about the Traveling Mercies for me was that we would go in and record live. We recorded the first album in 2 days, the second album in like 4 days, made 2 albums in 1 year. And it was just such a relief to be able to just like go in and just do it, even if it was raw and not as like manicured as like Dolour stuff. It just felt so good to do that. And I really needed that too, because I had a lot of like business pressure kind of stuff on me in the later days of the Dolour stuff. And so with the Mercies, it was like, we're like burning CDs ourselves, like packaging them, like stamping the cover art. Like it was just so DIY and just doing it because we loved it and just having fun. And that was something that I really hadn't had in a long time,
It's so interesting. I didn't really put this together until, maybe last time we talked or something, but I didn't know, your grandfather had passed, but sort of like, it sounds like when that happened, then, you started this band, the Traveling Mercies. And for people that don't know, it was kind of a family band.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, my brother on drums and my cousin on bass. So, I mean, that was a huge part of it. We started jamming like in my grandpa's basement, like just after he passed. And, you know, Across the River was written about him, and Lord Shine a Light. I mean, we were kind of just digging through. I mean, we were getting so into the family stuff. I even found like poetry that my great grandma had written and like tried to write a song around that. I mean, we were just kind of pulling from whatever we could get our hands on, going through my grandpa's record collection and stuff. And so it was like a real, you know, healing kind of project, you know, and just exactly what I needed after years of, you know, just the lonely pursuit of just these overdub records with Dolour and stuff. And um, so I do regret that I never was able to be like, okay, this is Dolour's last tour, or this is Dolour's last interview, or this is, you know, we never had like this is it. Like, it was just sort of like overnight, a whole new thing. And so I never really got the chance to sort of take people with me on that journey. It was just sort of like, either you're with me or you're not, like, goodbye, everybody, you know?
Oh, that kind of reminds, well, I had two thoughts on that actually.
Yeah.
One was I'm kind of glad that the door never closed, because now you can just easily, it's always been open.
Well, no, I mean, what I was saying was the door was tightly closed, and just since kind of working on that Solar Twin record, it started kind of opening up again. But I was 100% like never going to do another Dolour record, and never wanted, even when people would bring it up, it just made me uncomfortable. Or, you know, if people said that was their favorite music of mine, I'd like judge them. And, you know, it was like
me.
Yeah. I mean, it was, you know, I, for whatever reason, it was like a bad breakup in my mind, you know, of like, I didn't even know who that person was anymore. I didn't want anything to do with him. And, you know, there was just a lot of embarrassment of people constantly calling Dolour the next big thing, and then we weren't the next big thing, and sort of letting a lot of people down, from management to lawyers to bandmates that kind of thought they were like on their ticket to stardom or something. You know, there was just a lot of that kind of stuff that had nothing to do with the creative process, but it was just all the business side of it that was a real drag. And I saw a lot of bands that would get picked up to major labels and stuff and then get dropped, and then they'd essentially just like quit or give up or you know, or worse. And so for me, it was like a survival, you know, I was sort of just in survival mode. I'm like, I don't want to quit, you know, and I don't want to like kill myself or something. You know, I just need to like find another avenue to express myself in a way that could like heal me. Because, you know, like that machine, once you get on that thing, I mean, it will really grind you out if you let it, you know? So I feel like I kind of jumped ship to save myself, you know?
Yeah.
Not to get too heavy there, but
well, I mean, the goal is to get you to cry. So,
right. Barbara Walters. Yeah. I'll do my best.
Yeah, I guess there's just so much more depth to the whole story than I realized. I
mean, it's my life's journey, you know. I mean, I don't know if a lot of, you know, I almost envy the musicians that can sort of just be like, you know, it's all like, I remember filling in on bass for this band that I won't mention, Seattle band. And the band, we're all jamming, you know, working out the songs, and the singer's in the front yard, like working on spray painting signs that he's going to put up behind the band, and, you know, working on his outfit and how many belts he's going to be wearing, and, you know, everything else. And, you know, I'm just like, man, I always kind of envied people that could just sort of have like fun with it in that way. Cause it was always, I mean, I felt like I was constantly like, for me, like it's a soul bearing thing, you know? And, you know, I like making music that makes people feel good and stuff, but, it was never like, you know, just this like sort of, you know, fun little hobby to like, you know, meet girls or something, you know, but, but
well, that's what I've been really surprised about. And, just respect so much is I'm surprised that, you know, I knew I was following so many local Seattle bands. I feel like all my friends were in bands. Everyone was trying to start a band, you know, in the early 2000s. And then you're sort of the only one that just kept at it, just kept making your own music and you know, you doing you. And I thought that was really cool.
That, you know, that is something that I love about getting older, or like being at it as long as I have, is like, you know, all those little jealousies or, you know, like, oh man, that band's getting this attention that I wish I had, or this or that, all those things, you see everything just kind of fall to the wayside if you just keep going and doing your thing. And so, you know, that's something I would encourage any artist that's starting out. It's like, don't get hung up on all that little stuff. And I remember being conscious of that at the time, but of course, you know, you're like, oh man, like, why are they getting attention that I'm not, you know? And, but yeah, I mean, I can honestly look around at almost everybody that I thought was, you know, doing better than me at whatever moment. And 90% of them aren't even playing music anymore, let alone putting out records at any consistent rate or whatever. And so that is interesting. And especially, you know, since moving from Seattle to Nashville, I kind of had that reboot of like getting to be involved in a local scene. And like, I was able to kind of learn a lot from that earlier experience and just not, you know, get hung up on who's doing what and just keep doing my thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's
really cool. You do you. I love that.
Yeah. Yep.
What's the local scene like in Nashville?
Man, you know, I was pretty involved in it my first few years. I mean, I've been in Nashville now 10 years, and a lot of my first jobs in town were like working the door at different clubs and stuff. And I even got involved with like a local East Nashville radio station for a while, and I was like DJing weekly, and I got pretty involved in a bunch of different ways. Also, like downtown Nashville, which is lower Broadway, where all like the like honky tonks are and stuff. Like I got to know all those players because I was working at one of those bars. And then also like the hipster East Nashville, was working on the door at this other club there. And so I kind of was able to straddle a few different worlds, which is always kind of my thing anyway. So I was able to meet all these great old timer musicians. I was able to do a record with a guy that had played bass and arranged horns for Elvis. And,
Wow.
you know, I was able to go on a tour with Wanda Jackson, who's like the queen of rockabilly. And I was able to always kind of work in a few different worlds, and then, you know, play shows, you know, with tons of artists that are killing it now. And like Margot Price is a good friend, and she's been doing really well the last few years. And, so all that to say, I'm not as plugged in with that world these days. And I guess nobody really is with COVID shutdowns, but I mean, it's a vibrant scene. I think the biggest misperception of Nashville is that everyone's playing country, because that's just not true. And I really discovered that when I did the Solar Twin record and started playing shows with that and meeting a lot more like-minded people than I thought. Because when I first moved to town, I was doing a more rootsy thing and seeing a lot of that around, but kind of looking for bands to play with Solar Twin, I found a lot of cool kind of weirdo noise bands and synth heavy stuff. And, you know, so it's a vibrant community for sure. Nice.
And yeah, I mean, you mentioned Solar Twin, and now Dolour is coming out with a new album. I know you just released it yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I guess, I was curious. I think it's probably obvious to you, but not necessarily obvious to me and maybe to other people out there. But what makes Dolour different from other Shane Tutmark albums or projects? Like how did you decide, I guess, that this new album is Dolour and not Solar Twin or Mercies or what?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we touched a little bit on that earlier. I don't know that I could exactly pinpoint it. I mean, for me, for sure, with this record, I mean, being that these songs all had origins in that era, you know, just placed them in that world for me. I mean, there's a couple songs on the record possibly that could have worked or been adapted or produced in a way that could possibly have worked in another project. But I think, something about this sort of like defiant optimism that I feel like runs through the Dolour music. I mean, I remember even just the way Dolour started was sort of this like pop middle finger to like, hardcore and punk rock. And all my friends were in, noisy bands with no melodies. And I remember it feeling rebellious to like have a melody and like a hook. And like, of course there was other bands doing that. I didn't know about them, but it was like there was a rebellion to being that sort of like melodic and catchy, I guess, to me at that time. And so I feel like even once that just initial sort of like feeling maybe wasn't important to me anymore, that there was still like always this almost sort of defiant use of like, Disney-esque melodies and, like sing-alongable kind of stuff, and I guess that's sort of an element of Dolour that I don't see in the other projects I've done,
So Dolour is the FU to the punk.
I mean, I guess it's like, and I like a lot of that stuff too, but I guess it just sort of felt like it was almost this like, hey, I know you love this, like accept it, deal with it. Everybody loves a good pop song. That was sort of the mentality, because there was a lot of just like, oh, I mean, I'm a kind of a music snob. So, all my friends were music snobs. And there was a lot of sort of like, oh, this like obscure band on Drag City from Chicago that you need to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, fuck you, Cleopatra-ized, let's go. Like, I guess it felt like that a little bit to me at the time. I think it's interesting because I did like a podcast a couple years ago around the Solar Twin release, and the guy had listened to all my records the night before, which I'm sure was like an insane experience. I don't know. But he was like, oh, so I noticed you started with Dolour, which was like a really typical indie pop sound. And then you moved on to kind of more interesting stuff with this or that. And to me, I mean, maybe looking back, it feels more like of the era of other bands. But at the time, I didn't know other bands that were doing that kind of stuff. And, and I think if you look back to the other bands that we were playing with, at least locally and stuff like the Lashes or the Divorce, we didn't really sound like those bands. And, I was never trying to sound like a Seattle Scene band or whatever, but it is interesting. Like in hindsight, you're like, oh, cause like, I mean, even when we started, like no one had a keyboard in their band. And then within just like a year and a half, like every band had a keyboard, and it's like just even little things like that. Like, to me at the time felt like we were doing something really different. And that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, are the songs good? Like, are they, do they hold up or whatever? But at the time, it definitely felt like we were trying to kind of go against the grain of, Seattle still to this day is a very like rock town, like that's kind of their bread and butter out there. And so, even once I got into Traveling Mercies or solo stuff, we were still kind of riding against the local sound to a degree, but,
Seattle grunge.
Yeah. And I mean, Nirvana is like one of my favorite bands of all time, but I mean, but I essentially think of them as like a great pop band, a great loud pop band, but
yeah. I mean, in comparison, I don't know if people know the reference, but, I remember the Blood Brothers, for example, were really popular, and they were just noise.
Well, okay. I almost mentioned them because they were actually like my best friends in high school. So, I mean, that's pretty much my peer group that I was talking about. Yeah. So, I went to high school with those guys, and so, we played shows with the Blood Brothers as Dolour. And to me, I remember thinking we're more punk rock than they, I mean, cause I knew where those guys came from, and the Blood Brothers was kind of like a joke side project that ended up taking off, and they obviously took it seriously and made some great records, but they had like a serious band that wasn't really getting any attention, and then Blood Brothers was like kind of their joke band, and that happened so many times. Like United State of Electronica was kind of this like joke side project that ended up taking off and doing way more than like Wonderful, who the rest of the guys were in this other band called Wonderful, and so it seemed like there was I'd see that so much of like people just kind of doing something for fun as a joke. And then that's what connects with people, you know? But yeah, that's exactly, I mean, the Blood Brothers, I thought they were a great band and really creative within the confines of what punk rock is or whatever. But that was the exact scene that I was coming out of, kind of going like, you know what, I'm going to go a different direction. And I mean, I just went to so many hardcore shows and tried to pretend like I was into it. And, you know, it just never really worked for me. So,
yeah, it is interesting how different I mean, I think I saw somewhere, I don't know if it was in one of my pictures or if it was on your website or Instagram, but I saw something where it was like, I think I went to the show. It was like you and like the Fall of Troy. Do you remember that band too?
I mean, I remember the name. Yeah.
Oh, okay. They were also like pretty hard.
Yeah.
Screamo, I guess.
Right. We got thrown in with a lot of that stuff. And, you know, even like reviews, you know, often would sort of be like, for fans of this, I just, you know, that was the thing with Dolour that was tough for me, was every band we ever got compared to, I like didn't connect with at all. So, yeah, that was also something, a little thorn in my side as a little 21-year-old, you know, punk. But
I mean, I like that concept though. It's sort of next level punk rock.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, because I guess at some point when punk rock is, you know, I'd look at those dudes wearing all their like safety pins and buttons and whatever, and it's like, it's the same thing as people wearing bell bottoms, you know. It's like punk already happened, you know, in 1977. You know, it's like you're just dressing up, you know.
Right.
That's all you're doing, you know. So I realized that pretty quickly, you know. I mean, even Nirvana admitted that they were just basically, you know, regurgitating the music they loved when they were kids, you know, like, and so it's interesting what kind of ends up getting looked at as like revolutionary or new when nothing's really new, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. If you know your history, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's sort of like, did you ever watch Battlestar Galactica?
I didn't. I don't think I've ever seen an episode.
I really like it.
Okay.
The newer version of it, not the original, but the newer one.
Okay.
Anyway, there's this phrase that they say often in the show, and it's this has all happened before and this will all happen again. And so it just kind of reminds me of that, of like, you know, things just, history repeats itself, and
right. There's nothing new under the sun.
I mean, I think there is, but it's sort of, it's evolving, I guess. But it's,
yeah, I think it's just finding a new way to say things that have been said before, maybe, you know, like, or new combinations of existing things, or that's kind of the way I always looked at it. I mean, you know, even with songwriting or whatever, it's like, you know, if you take everything that you love and put it through your filter, it's going to come out different no matter what, you know. But you could dissect it if you wanted to, and that's no fun. But, you know, and you could be like, oh, this little strand comes from that, or this little strand comes from that. But ultimately, you know, you're sort of just making a cocktail or something, you know.
Yep. So one thing we talked about last time that I think is really interesting, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but you were saying that you don't actually own the Suburbiac masters.
Right.
And therefore you were thinking of maybe re-recording them. Is that a possibility?
Well, I mean, it's crossed my mind, you know, like Prince did that famously with his early catalog that he didn't own the masters to. And, you know, the problem is you can't really re-record everything exactly the same. So it would be like a whole new record of those songs, you know. But yeah, I've tried to reach out. What happened was like the label that we were on sold their catalog to EMI in like 2006 or something like that. And like I wasn't involved with any of that stuff, any of that decision making. So contracts that may have been up by now kind of got swallowed up by that deal. And like, I tried to reach out to him when it was like the 15th anniversary of Suburbiac, just to see if I like had the rights to like put out vinyl or something for it.
Oh, wow.
And kind of went through a few different emails, people throwing me, oh, you should talk to this guy. And then he's saying you should talk to this guy. And it never ended up going anywhere. And so, yeah, it's kind of a lost cause unless I had some, you know, big budget to get a lawyer on it to figure it out. But, you know, that record will be 20 years old in 2 years. And, I'd love to do something for it, you know? And yeah, so maybe the idea of, it would be a lot of work, but you know, maybe it would be worth kind of putting out a new version of that record or something like that, you know?
Well, I think for you, it would be a lot of work because what I also found out recently is that current Dolour and maybe a lot of the other projects that you've been working on, you're sort of just a one-man show. So you're playing all the instruments, or can you just elaborate more?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably how I would do it. I mean, a lot of the Dolour stuff was most like 90% me anyways, but I would usually have somebody to come in and play a guitar solo or somebody to come in and play a theremin solo or something. You know, I would get like kind of auxiliary people in here and there, but the Royal We, yeah, is the first time I've played everything, myself. And I really like that, but it is just like, you don't really have people to bounce things off of, or you're kind of in your head a lot trying to like know what makes sense for you or what makes sense for Dolour. Like, what even is Dolour? Isn't Dolour just me? Like, I don't even know. Like, you know, just getting lost in that whole, like, what is this? You know, what am I doing when you don't really have somebody there? You know, I mean, of course I would send rough mixes to friends and stuff and get some opinions, but ultimately it was just like, does this feel right to me? You know? So that, yeah, that would be a thing that would be tough about reapproaching a record I've already made. Is just like, you know, when the going got tough in that process, I'm sure it would be easy to go like, well, I've already fucking made this record. Like, why am I doing this? You know? And there's just so, you know, our lives are so short, you know, and I do have so much music to make that, you know, it would feel like a real, I would have to really believe that there was some value in doing that, you know, beyond financial or whatever. And so we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's sort of like re-recording Suburbiac would be at the cost of future.
Another record. I mean, even this Dolour record, I stopped work on a Solar Twin record that I was halfway through, you know, when I was just kind of like, you know, I think this might be the place to go, you know? So, I kind of like need to do this now, you know, because I don't know when it would ever make sense to do, you know. And after making that first Solar Twin record, I really kind of, more than I'd ever had before, like really said, okay, I'm not going to like immediately start writing another record. I want to just kind of sit with it. I was really proud of the Solar Twin record. And then I started sort of slowly accidentally writing songs and stuff and kind of going there. And I still just wasn't really ready to make another Solar Twin record. So this kind of gave me a chance to like work on something else and pour a lot of energy into something else. Because, I don't want to rush things as much as I used to. Just, you know, I was just like I was talking about at the end of the Dolour days, it was like just so many things piled up. And I'm glad, you know, I wrote those things, and I'm glad now that there's a whole new record worth of songs that had started from that batch. But now I want to move a little bit at a slower, maybe more deliberate, more focused pace or whatever, you know, so we'll see. New Solar Twin record in 2 months, folks. Look for it. No.
Maybe.